The night was quiet except for the hum of the ship's old engines. The human explorer David had been drifting near the edges of alien territory when his scanner caught something unusual. A faint signal pulsed through the darkness, almost like a heartbeat. He leaned closer to the screen, frowning. It was not a ship, not a beacon. It was something different, something alive. Without thinking twice, he adjusted the course and followed the weak trail. The signal led him to a half-buried medical pod floating near a broken satellite. The pod looked ancient, scarred from battle, and its lights flickered as if on their last breath. David pulled it aboard carefully, feeling the weight of mystery. He brushed away the dust on its surface and froze. Behind the cracked glass of the pod lay an alien woman. Her body was still, her skin glowing faintly like silver under moonlight. She was beautiful but broken, her breathing shallow, her chest barely rising. One look at her and David felt something he had not felt in years, responsibility. He forced the pod open with a hiss. Cold air escaped and the woman stirred slightly, her eyelids trembling. David bent down, watching closely. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then he noticed it. On her neck, near her collarbone, a sealed orifice, like a second mouth or strange organ. It was closed tight, glowing faintly, as if locked. He had read reports of this species. That organ was their lifeline. When it sealed, death was certain. Her people had probably abandoned her, leaving her to drift until her final breath. David touched the edge of the sealed organ gently, and she flinched. Her glowing eyes opened wide for a moment, full of fear and shame. She tried to lift her hand, trembling fingers pointing at her throat. He understood. She was begging, not with words, but with her eyes, pleading for help. He whispered softly, "I'll try." He had no idea what he was promising, but he couldn't leave her like this. He carried her out of the pod and laid her on his medical table. The faint hum of his ship surrounded them, and he felt the weight of silence pressing against his ears. The woman's breaths came slower now, each one weaker than the last. David searched through his supplies. He had basic human tools, old medkits, and improvised instruments. Nothing here was made for alien physiology, but it was all he had. He cleaned his hands, tied back his sleeves, and studied the strange sealed orifice again. The alien woman's body trembled. She clutched his wrist weakly, her skin cold and smooth like glass. Her eyes begged him not to stop. David nodded once. His heart pounded. He had repaired machines, patched up engines, even saved wounded soldiers, but this was different. One mistake, and she would die in his hands. He pressed lightly along the edges of the sealed organ. It was rigid, almost like stone, but he felt something deeper inside, a faint pulse, fighting, refusing to die. Sweat slid down his forehead. He tried different tools, a small scanner, a probe, even his fingers, searching for a weak point. Every second mattered. Her breaths grew shorter, her lips turning pale blue. David cursed under his breath, forcing himself to stay calm. He remembered something his mentor once told him. Machines and bodies both are systems. When one path is blocked, you look for another. He applied that wisdom here, even though fear pressed heavily on his chest. The woman gasped suddenly, her body jerking as if in pain. David froze, afraid he had hurt her. But then she shook her head weakly, her eyes glowing brighter, telling him to continue. He swallowed hard and pressed again, this time harder, pushing against the seal. His fingers ached, but he didn't stop. He felt something shift, a faint crack like frozen ice beginning to break. He leaned closer, whispering, "Come on, stay with me. Don't give up." Her hand squeezed his wrist suddenly, stronger this time. Her breaths came ragged, each one scraping against silence. David pressed harder, and the seal gave a little more. A faint hiss escaped as if trapped air had been released. For a heartbeat, her eyes widened, glowing brighter. He knew he was close, but then the glow dimmed again, her head rolling back slightly. Panic struck him. He had to act fast, or she would slip away forever. He adjusted his grip, ignoring the pain in his hands, and forced the edges apart with everything he had. The resistance was unbearable, like prying open steel. But David was stubborn. He pressed, pulled, and refused to quit. Slowly, the seal cracked open wider, glowing with a strange energy. A sudden rush of air burst out, and the woman gasped loudly, her chest rising as if life had slammed back into her body. David staggered back, panting, his hands trembling. He watched as the alien woman's breathing grew steadier, stronger. Her skin glowed brighter now, a soft silver radiance spreading across her body. Her eyes opened fully, locking onto his. They were filled with shock, confusion, and something else, wonder. She lifted her hand shakily, touching her throat, then pointing at him. Her lips moved, and for the first time, a faint whisper escaped. It was only one word. She whispered, "Impossible." Her body still shook from the sudden return of air, but now her eyes stayed open. They glowed faintly, catching every small movement of the human standing over her. She tried to speak again, her lips parting, but her voice cracked into silence. Her throat convulsed as though words had been locked away for too long. Frustration showed in her trembling hands. Slowly, painfully, she lifted her arm and pointed weakly at her neck, then at him, then pressed her hand over her heart. David understood enough. She was pleading, but not just for her life anymore. There was something she wanted him to know, something buried deeper than her failing body. He leaned closer, his voice calm, though his heart still raced. "You're safe now. I won't leave you." His words carried no translation device, but somehow she stilled, her fingers tightening slightly around his sleeve as if she understood the meaning through tone alone. Her breathing steadied with each passing moment, but weakness kept her pinned to the table. David moved around, adjusting lights, checking monitors, but her eyes followed him everywhere. There was fear in them, yes, but also trust, a strange mix that unsettled him. When he paused to fetch a nutrient vial, her hand lifted again, this time with more urgency. Her glowing fingers brushed across his wrist and held him there. Her lips formed shapes slowly, carefully. Though broken, the whisper reached him, "Help, please." The sound cut straight into him. He had heard thousands beg for help across wars and wrecks, but this was different. Her voice carried loneliness, despair, and a shame so deep it hurt to witness. He frowned, gently placing the vial aside. "I'm here," he said quietly, and her body relaxed slightly, her shoulders sinking into the table as though his promise gave her strength. She blinked slowly, her eyes shimmering. She shifted her hand to her chest again, then toward her sealed organ, now faintly glowing as if still unstable. It pulsed irregularly, like a heart struggling to find rhythm. She pressed her palm over it, eyes squeezed shut, and when she opened them again, tears had gathered. She shook her head once, her lips mouthing something silent, and then she pointed toward the darkness beyond the ship's walls. David followed her gesture, but saw nothing through the steel bulkheads. Still, he understood she was abandoned, left behind. Her people had judged her broken and useless. That shame now hung between them, heavier than the cold air in the cabin. He clenched his fists at the thought. Advanced alien medicine had turned away, while they had left her adrift like trash. When his gaze returned to her, she was watching him intently, almost fearful of his judgment too. David leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I don't care what they said. You're alive. That's enough." His words struck her visibly. Her lips parted in disbelief, and for a long moment she just stared, as though she had never heard such a thing spoken to her. Her fingers suddenly tightened around his hand, pulling it shakily toward her chest. He felt the warmth of her glowing skin under his palm, the frantic thrum of life trying to hold on. She closed her eyes, whispering in a broken voice, "Not. Leave." The plea shook him. It wasn't only survival she wanted. She feared being alone again, drifting through endless silence until death claimed her. He brushed her damp hair back from her face. "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly, almost like a vow. Her breath caught, and she let out a trembling exhale, her body softening against the table. The air between them grew heavy with unspoken meaning, and for the first time since finding her, David felt the depth of the bond forming. This wasn't just about saving her life anymore. It was about giving her hope. Minutes stretched into an hour as he worked carefully, cleaning her wounds, setting her body into balance with what little supplies he had. All the while, she never released his hand completely. Her eyes fluttered open and closed, watching him with quiet intensity as if memorizing his presence. Sometimes she tried to form words, but they came out as broken sounds. Other times she simply stared, her gaze filled with questions she could not ask. When exhaustion finally overtook her, she whispered something again, softer than breath. David leaned close to catch it. The word was foreign, alien, but its meaning resonated in the way she spoke it, fragile, tender, desperate. Her hand slipped from his wrist as she fell into uneasy sleep, her glow dim but steady. David sat beside her, his mind restless. He had only meant to salvage wreckage, But instead, he had pulled aboard a life that had been thrown away. She was a mystery, a danger perhaps, but also a miracle. David didn't sleep. He sat beside her, watching the slow rhythm of her breaths, each rise and fall of her chest reminding him of how close she had been to death only hours ago. The faint silver glow of her skin lit the small room with a ghostly light, casting long shadows across the walls. Every now and then her body shivered as if fighting some unseen battle within. He checked her vitals again with his old human scanner, but the readings flickered between stability and collapse. She was alive, but far from safe. When her eyes finally fluttered open, they locked on him immediately. No confusion, no hesitation, just a searching look as if making sure he hadn't left. David leaned closer, speaking softly, "You're still here. You're safe." She blinked slowly, her gaze moving to the strange sealed organ on her throat. Though partly open now, it still pulsed unevenly, struggling like a broken valve. She touched it weakly, then looked back at him with a question she couldn't voice. David pulled his toolkit closer, spreading out his crude instruments on the table. He had learned long ago that human stubbornness could replace advanced tools when needed. The alien woman followed his movements, her eyes sharp despite her weakness. She flinched when he lifted a probe, but he raised his other hand calmly. "I won't hurt you," he said firmly, hoping the tone would reach her if not the words. He studied the orifice carefully. It wasn't just a breathing system. The structure looked layered, almost mechanical yet alive. He noticed faint ridges along the edges, ridges that shifted when he applied pressure. The organ resisted him, tightening shut as though aware of his attempts. He frowned, sweat forming on his brow. Every attempt to force it open again only made her wince in pain. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Her breaths grew shorter, her glow dimmer. Fear pressed on him like a weight. His hands trembled, not from doubt, but from the knowledge that one wrong move could undo everything he had fought to save. He tried adjusting the tools, switching angles, but the seal refused to yield. A sudden sound escaped her throat, a sharp gasp, her eyes glowing brighter in panic. She clutched at his wrist desperately, her nails biting into his skin. David froze, but then she guided his hand downward, not to force the seal, but to press gently at a different spot along her collarbone. He followed her motion, pressing carefully, and to his surprise, the seal twitched faintly in response. She looked at him with urgency, urging him to continue. David leaned in, his focus narrowing to that small point. He pressed again, firmer this time, and felt the hidden mechanism shift under her skin. The seal pulsed erratically, then loosened slightly before tightening again. It wasn't brute strength that would save her. It was precision. She had tried to tell him in her broken way, and now he understood. He adjusted his tools, using smaller, steadier motions. His hands moved with the care of an engineer tuning delicate wires. Each press brought a small reaction, a hiss of air, a faint glow, a stronger breath. Her body responded in tiny victories, her chest rising a little higher, her glow warming the air around them. Still, the struggle was brutal. Twice she coughed violently, her entire frame shuddering as if she might collapse again. David steadied her with one arm while working with the other, refusing to let panic control him. "Hold on," he whispered through clenched teeth, his voice breaking into the silence of the ship. "Just hold on." Then it happened. A sudden click reverberated beneath his fingertips, a sound almost mechanical yet alive. The seal quivered, then opened further, releasing a surge of warmth and light. The alien woman gasped, her voice breaking free in a cry that was both pain and relief. Air rushed through her body, her glow flaring bright enough to light the entire cabin. David staggered back, wiping sweat from his forehead. He stared at her, stunned. She lay trembling but alive, her breaths now steady, her chest rising with newfound strength. Her eyes opened slowly, brighter than before, locked onto him as if he was the only thing in existence. She tried to speak again, but her voice cracked, strange sounds spilling from her throat. Frustrated, she reached for him, gripping his sleeve tightly. David leaned close, trying to listen. The words were broken, barely shaped, but he caught one sound repeated again and again. A word from her language, unfamiliar, yet heavy with meaning. She clung to it as though it was her only anchor to life. Her glow filled the room like pale firelight, yet her body trembled as if carrying the weight of two worlds. David steadied her against the table, his hands firm but careful. feeling her heartbeat quickening beneath fragile skin. The organ at her throat now pulsed rhythmically, no longer sealed but unstable, as though one wrong touch could undo everything he had achieved. Her gaze stayed fixed on him, wide and unblinking, searching for reassurance. He brought his scanner closer, the cracked screen flickering with unstable readings. Nothing matched human biology, but patterns began to emerge, strange signals, a second rhythm beneath her heartbeat, like a hidden system rebooting itself. David frowned, his mind racing. He had no manual, no translation, nothing but instinct. Yet instinct was what had saved her once already. She shifted suddenly, a weak cry escaping her lips. Her body arched, her glow intensifying until the entire cabin shimmered in silver light. David shielded his eyes but stayed close. Her hand shot out, clutching his shirt with surprising strength. Her lips moved quickly now, forming words in a language he couldn't understand. Still, the desperation in her tone told him everything. Something was changing inside her, and it frightened her. David placed both hands on her shoulders, grounding her. "Stay with me," he said firmly, though he doubted she understood the words. His tone, however, reached her. She stilled slightly, her trembling subsiding just enough for him to work. He adjusted the pressure near her throat again, gently massaging along the ridges of the organ. The glow reacted instantly, flashing brighter, then softening into a steady light. She gasped, her voice breaking into an unsteady cry before calming again. Her eyes opened wider, wet with tears, her chest rising in deep, desperate breaths. For the first time, her voice shaped a single word clearly. "Life," she whispered in halting English, her accent broken, but the meaning undeniable. David froze, his breath catching in his throat. She had learned the word from him, memorized it, and now she was telling him what he had given back to her. Before he could respond, the ship shuddered violently. The sudden motion threw him against the wall, and alarms blared. He scrambled to the console, scanning the sensors. A vessel had appeared on the radar, alien in design, its sharp silhouette unmistakable. They weren't just searching, they were hunting. David's heart clenched. Whoever had abandoned her didn't want her rescued. The alien woman sensed it too. Her glow dimmed with fear, her trembling returning. She tried to sit up, clutching at him with wide, terrified eyes. He pulled her close, steadying her, whispering, "I've got you." The words meant nothing to her ears, but the tone was a shield against the storm. The hostile ship drew closer, its lights cutting through the void. David knew he couldn't outrun them with his old engines. His only chance was to hide, to stay silent and hope. But one look at the glowing woman told him it was impossible. She radiated like a beacon, her presence impossible to conceal. Desperation clawed at him. He shut down unnecessary systems, killed external lights, and set the ship into a slow drift. Then he crouched beside her, his hand brushing her throat where the organ pulsed brightly. "Please," he whispered, as though speaking to both her and fate itself. "Hold steady." Her glow flickered as if she understood the danger. She pressed her hand weakly over his, guiding it again to the ridges at her throat. He followed her silent instructions, applying steady pressure. Slowly, painfully, the light dimmed to a faint shimmer, just enough to keep her alive, but not enough to shine through the hull. Her breaths became shallower, but controlled, her strength focused on survival. The enemy vessel scanned the area, beams of light cutting across space. David held his breath, every nerve on edge. The alien woman clung to him, her body pressed against his side, her glow faint but steady. Together they waited in silence, the hum of approaching death vibrating through the metal walls. The scanner beeped once, then fell quiet. The hostile ship lingered, prowling like a predator in the dark. Minutes stretched into eternity until finally the radar showed it moving away, its silhouette shrinking into the endless void. David let out a long breath, collapsing back against the wall. The alien woman's glow brightened slightly again, her breathing deepening as she relaxed in his arms. She lifted her trembling hand to his face, and her fingers brushing against his cheek, as if to confirm he was real. David barely had time to rest. The threat had passed, but the silence that followed carried its own weight. The alien woman lay against him, her silver glow soft and steady, yet her eyes stayed open, watching him as though afraid he would vanish if she blinked. Her hand lingered on his cheek, trembling with weakness but firm with meaning. She whispered the word again, her voice clearer this time. "Life." The sound shook him more than the alarms had. She had no reason to trust him, yet she clung to him as if he was her last anchor in the universe. He gently set her back onto the table and stood, running a hand through his damp hair. His chest still burned from the panic of nearly being discovered, but another thought now pressed harder. Why had her people wanted her dead? What secret was sealed inside her that they feared so much? He turned back to her, studying the strange organ at her throat. It pulsed like a second heart, glowing brighter now that the danger had passed. Its rhythm seemed stronger, but it carried a strange resonance that sent chills up his arms every time he touched it. It wasn't just biology, it was something more, something alive with a purpose he couldn't yet see. She noticed his stare. Her hand lifted weakly, covering the organ as if to shield it from his eyes. Her gaze softened, almost ashamed, and then she shook her head slowly. She tried to form words in her own language, soft, broken syllables spilling into the air. David didn't understand, but her tone told him enough. She was afraid of what he might think if he knew the truth. He crouched beside her, lowering his voice. "I don't care what it is," he said. "You're still alive. That's all that matters." His words were simple, but she shivered as though struck by something deeper. Tears glimmered at the corners of her glowing eyes, and she caught his hand in both of hers, pulling it to her chest. Her heartbeat raced beneath his palm, desperate and wild. The ship's console beeped suddenly, pulling David's attention away. He hurried over, scanning the data. A transmission was repeating nearby, faint but steady. He adjusted the receiver, and the voice of the alien tongue filled the cabin, calm, authoritative, and merciless. He didn't need translation to know the meaning. They were searching for her. They hadn't left. His jaw clenched. He returned to her side, and her eyes widened in recognition at the sound of the transmission. She shook her head rapidly, her breath quickening, and muttered words he couldn't decipher. Fear rolled off her like heat. David placed his hands on her shoulders. "I won't give you to them," he said firmly, though again, she may not have understood the words. Still, her trembling slowed at his tone, and she clung tighter to him. Time was running out. He needed answers. Gently, he pressed near her throat again, studying the rhythm of the organ. She flinched, but didn't stop him. He felt the ridges shift under his fingertips, almost like a lock resisting his touch. Her glow brightened sharply and her body tensed, but she didn't push him away. Instead, her eyes searched his face, almost daring him to see for himself. He worked carefully, pressing where the ridges aligned. A hum vibrated through his skin, strange and alive, like energy stored beneath flesh. The glow flared, filling the cabin, and suddenly a projection burst into the air above them. Light, images, symbols swirling like stars. David stumbled back in shock. The organ wasn't just for life. It was holding something, storing something vast. The alien woman's voice broke through the shimmer. She whispered a word in her own tongue, then repeated it again, forcing the syllables into broken English. Memory. David stared at the shifting symbols. Star maps, coded designs, fragments of data he couldn't understand. He realized then why she had been abandoned. She wasn't just a dying woman, she was carrying something her people wanted erased. And now, by opening what no one else could, he had set it free. Her body weakened again, the projection fading as she slumped forward. David caught her before she hit the floor. She looked up at him with tired eyes, whispering one last word before sleep pulled her under. David laid her gently back on the table, his heart pounding at what he had just witnessed. The cabin was still glowing faintly from the projection. The strange symbols burned into his memory, even though they had already vanished. He sat there in the silence, trying to steady his breath, realizing the truth. Her people hadn't abandoned her because she was broken. They had abandoned her because she carried something too dangerous to exist. Her glow dimmed as she slept, but her body twitched as if caught in a dream. He brushed a strand of her hair from her face, his fingers hesitating at the warmth of her skin. Her word lingered in his mind, echoing over and over, trust. She had given it to him, though he barely understood why. He had saved her life, yes, but this was more. She had chosen him to carry her secret, a burden he had never asked for. The console beeped again. Another scan from the enemy vessel swept past. They weren't leaving, they were tightening their net. David cursed under his breath and turned off every non-essential system, reducing the ship to a drifting husk. The hum of the engine died away, leaving only the sound of his own heartbeat. He knew it was only a matter of time before they came directly. A weak voice pulled him back. Her eyes fluttered open, glowing faintly in the dim light. She tried to sit up, but her body betrayed her, and she fell back with a soft cry. David moved quickly to steady her. She looked at him, her lips forming strange words he couldn't understand. She pointed to the sealed organ, then tapped her temple, then pointed out toward the void where the hunters waited. He pieced it together slowly. The organ held more than life. It carried knowledge, star maps, information that others wanted destroyed, and now it had been opened by a human, something even her own people could not achieve. She trembled, whispering another broken English word she had forced herself to learn. Danger. David exhaled slowly. Yeah, he muttered. I figured. But even as he said it, he couldn't look away from her. Weak, terrified, yet alive because of him. He had no reason to fight for her, no reason to risk his life against an entire alien fleet. But the thought of handing her over was impossible. He couldn't erase the moment she had begged him not to leave. Her hand reached for his wrist again, gripping it with surprising strength. She shook her head slowly, her eyes begging him. Then, in her halting, broken English, she forced out another word. Stay. The ship shuddered. A piercing alarm screamed through the cabin. The hunters had found them. David swore and rushed to the console. A massive shadow filled the radar, larger than anything his old ship could ever face. Weapons locked onto him, their signals undeniable. He turned back. The alien woman's glow flared brighter, her body trembling violently. She pointed at the organ again, then at the projection device in the ceiling. She wanted him to use it, to reveal what she carried. He hesitated, fear tightening his chest. If he activated it, the hunters would know exactly where they were. But if he didn't, they would be destroyed anyway. Her eyes burned into his. There was no fear in them now, only resolve. She mouthed one more word with painful clarity. Open. David clenched his fists, then slammed his hand against the console. The cabin erupted in light as the organ flared, projecting the map again. This time it was larger, brighter, filling every corner with symbols and coordinates. The hunters reacted immediately, beams of light scanning toward them, but something strange happened. The projection reached beyond the cabin, broadcasting outward into space like a beacon. The alien woman gasped, her body arching as if the energy drained from her directly. David caught her as she fell against him, her glow flickering wildly. Her voice shook, barely audible. Not just memory. Hope. Outside, the enemy ship shifted suddenly, its weapons halting. The broadcast wasn't just a map. It was something greater, something powerful enough to make even their hunters pause. David held her close, staring out at the radar as more signals began to flicker into range. Not enemy ships this time, different ones responding to the beacon she had released. Reinforcements or something else entirely. The cabin was drowned in silver light, the beacon still pulsing from her throat as the projection stretched into the stars. David held her against him, feeling her glow weaken with every passing second. She had given everything to release it, and now her body trembled as if the life he had fought to protect was slipping through his fingers again. He gritted his teeth, refusing to believe it. He wouldn't let her die after all of this. On the radar, the hunters closed in, their formation tightening like jaws around prey. Yet their weapons stayed silent. They didn't fire because they couldn't, not with what she had unleashed. The projection filled the void, symbols streaming across space, too vast to comprehend. Even their advanced systems couldn't ignore it. They had abandoned her because she carried something they feared. Now it was free, and the galaxy itself was watching. The alien woman stirred faintly, her glowing eyes finding him through the haze. She struggled to lift her hand, pressing it weakly to his chest. Her lips formed the word she had forced into his language, the one she had clung to since he saved her. Life. Her voice was fading, but the meaning was louder than any alarm. David's heart pounded. He tightened his hold on her, whispering, "You're not dying here. Not while I'm still breathing." His words trembled, but his resolve was iron. He carried her back to the medical table and worked frantically. Stabilizers, oxygen feed, anything he had left. His tools were primitive, but he refused to stop. Every flicker of her glow drove him harder. Outside, the radar beeped again. More ships were arriving, not hunters but strangers. Different signals, different designs. They had heard the beacon, answering a call that had been sealed away inside her for who knew how long, a message of hope, of survival, maybe even rebellion. The hunters shifted nervously, caught between silencing it and retreating before a storm greater than themselves. The alien woman gasped, her body arching, the light from her throat flaring again. She whispered a word in her own tongue, foreign yet sharp with meaning. David didn't understand, but her eyes burned with certainty as she said it. She pointed to him, then to the stars, then closed her hand around his. He looked at her, then at the console, then at the beacon still pulsing like a heart outside the ship. He understood enough. She had given him trust, given him the future she could not carry alone. His hands shook as he set a new course, one that followed the stream of coordinates hidden in the projection. He didn't know where it would lead, only that it was the path she had risked everything to reveal. Her glow dimmed, but her breathing steadied under his touch. She was alive, fragile, but holding on. He brushed his hand against her cheek, and her eyes softened before closing in exhausted sleep.